In the summer of 1587, a group of more than 100 English men, women and children arrived on the shores of Roanoke Island. This sliver of land, nestled between the mainland of what would become North Carolina and the treacherous Outer Banks, was to be their new home. They came with high hopes, dreaming of a life of opportunity and plenty in the vast, uncharted American continent. They were not soldiers or adventurers seeking gold, but families looking to plant roots, to build a permanent English settlement in the New World. Their journey across the wide, unforgiving Atlantic had been long and arduous, but as they stepped onto the soil, a sense of promise filled the air. Their leader was a man named John White. He was an artist and a cartographer, a man whose gentle nature seemed ill-suited for the harsh realities of founding a colony. Yet he was also the governor, entrusted with the welfare of every soul under his command, including his own daughter, Eleanor Dare, and his newborn granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. Under White's guidance, the settlers began the back-breaking work of creating a community from scratch. They repaired the cottages and the small fort left behind by a previous failed military expedition, their hammers and saws breaking the primeval silence of the ancient forests. The settlers' vision was for a thriving agricultural community, a city of rally that would serve as a beacon of English civilization. They imagined fields of corn and gardens of English vegetables flourishing under the warm Virginia sun. They believed that, with hard work and God's favor, they could transform this wilderness into a prosperous and secure home for themselves and for generations to come. This was more than just an outpost. It was meant to be the start of an English empire in America. The settlers were pioneers in the truest sense, facing the unknown with courage, faith, and profound optimism about the future they were determined to build. Their initial efforts were marked by a sense of urgent purpose. Men felled tall pines and sturdy oaks to expand their small settlement, while women tended to the domestic tasks of cooking, mending, and caring for the children. They were acutely aware of their isolation, a tiny island of English life, surrounded by a vast and mysterious land. Every task, from digging a well for fresh water to clearing a plot of land for planting, was a step towards securing their fragile existence. They looked to John White for leadership, trusting that his knowledge and his connection to the powerful patrons in England would see them through the difficult months ahead. The land itself was a paradox of breathtaking beauty and hidden dangers. Roanoke Island was lush and green, a landscape of dense maritime forests, sprawling marshes, and sandy beaches. The air was thick with the scent of pine and salt, and the sounds of unfamiliar birds filled the day. The waters teemed with fish, and the forest held an abundance of game. To the English settlers accustomed to the tamed countryside of their homeland, it must have seemed like a paradise, a place of incredible natural wealth. This initial impression of abundance, however, soon gave way to a more sober understanding of the challenges that lay before them. The climate was unlike anything they had experienced. The summers were intensely hot and humid, bringing swarms of biting insects and the constant threat of disease. Violent thunderstorms would roll in from the ocean with little warning, their lightning and torrential rain terrifying the colonists huddled in their simple wooden homes. The settlers also had to contend with the local wildlife. While deer and turkey provided food, there were also bears and wolves in the deep woods, and venomous snakes were a constant concern. The New World was not the gentle, welcoming land they had perhaps imagined. It was wild, untamed, and indifferent to their survival. Their attempts at farming, which were central to their hopes for self-sufficiency, met with limited success. The seeds they had brought from England were planted late in the growing season, and the sandy soil of the island was not ideal for English crops. Their harvests were meager, not nearly enough to sustain the colony through the coming winter. They quickly realized they would have to depend on trade with the local Native American tribes for food. This relationship was fraught with misunderstanding and suspicion from the start, colored by previous hostile encounters between the English and the local peoples, making any interaction a delicate and potentially dangerous affair. As the summer of 1587 wore on, the settlers' supplies began to dwindle at an alarming rate. The food they had brought with them was running low, and their tools and clothing were wearing out. The initial optimism began to fade, replaced by a growing anxiety about the future. They were thousands of miles from home with no prospect of immediate resupply. It became clear to everyone, including Governor John White, that without fresh provisions and more colonists from England, their dream of a permanent settlement was doomed to fail. A difficult decision had to be made, and it had to be made quickly. Faced with the grim reality of their situation, the colonists persuaded John White to return to England. It was a painful choice for him. He would have to leave behind his family, his daughter, his granddaughter, and the entire community he was meant to protect. However, he was the one person with the connections and influence in London to secure the vital relief mission they so desperately needed. He promised them he would return as quickly as possible by the following spring at the latest. With a heavy heart, he set sail in late August 1587, leaving the 115 settlers to fend for themselves on that remote island shore. White's journey back to England was swift, but his timing could not have been worse. When he arrived, he found the nation in a state of high alert, preparing for an all-out war with Spain. Queen Elizabeth I and her government were commandeering every available ship for the defense of the realm against the formidable Spanish Armada. All civilian and commercial voyages, including relief missions to the Americas, were forbidden. White pleaded desperately with officials, but his petitions were lost in the urgency of the national crisis. The year 1588 came and went, marked by the historic English victory over the Armada, but still no ship was made available for Roanoke. The promised quick return stretched into a torturously long delay. 1 year turned into 2, and then 3. For John White, it must have been an agonizing wait, filled with constant worry for the family and friends he had left behind. He could only imagine the hardships they were facing, their supplies long gone, their hope perhaps beginning to wane. He never stopped trying to organize a rescue, but he was thwarted at every turn by war, politics, and a lack of funds. The fate of the small colony on the other side of the world was simply not a priority for a nation fighting for its own survival. Finally, in 1590, White managed to secure passage on a privateering expedition that agreed to stop at Roanoke. After 3 long years, he was at last on his way back. As his ship approached the island in August, his heart must have been pounding with a mix of hope and dread. On a stormy evening, he and a landing party made their way to the shore, shouting and sounding trumpets, hoping for an answer from the colonists. But the only reply was the sound of the wind and the crashing waves. The settlement, which had been a place of such promise, was ominously silent. As John White and his men walked through the abandoned settlement, a scene of eerie desolation met their eyes. The houses had been dismantled, not burned or destroyed in a fight, suggesting an orderly departure. The area was overgrown with weeds, as if it had been empty for some time. There were no signs of a battle, no human remains, nothing to indicate a sudden catastrophe. It was as if the entire colony, all 115 people, had simply vanished into thin air. The heavy chests and personal belongings White had buried for safekeeping had been dug up and looted, their contents scattered about, but the colonists themselves were gone. The searchers' most significant discovery was a single, cryptic word carved into a large post of the fort's palisade: CROATOAN. The letters were etched clearly and deliberately. White also found the letters CRO carved into a nearby tree. This was the clue he had been waiting for, a prearranged signal. Before he had left for England, he had instructed the settlers that if they had to move, they should carve their destination into a tree or post. If they were in distress, they were to add a Maltese cross. There was no cross, which gave White hope that his family and the others were safe, having relocated to CROATOAN Island. CROATOAN Island, known today as Hatteras Island, was the home of the friendly CROATOAN people, led by their chief, Manteo, who had been a trusted ally of the English. It was a logical destination, a place where the colonists might have sought refuge and assistance. White was desperate to sail the 50 miles south to investigate, but he was not in command of the expedition. A powerful storm was brewing, and the ship's captain, anxious about the dangerous waters and eager to pursue Spanish treasure ships, refused to risk it. With his anchor cable lost, the captain sailed away, forcing a heartbroken John White to return to England without ever reaching CROATOAN. The mystery of what happened to the Lost Colony of Roanoke has endured for over 4 centuries, becoming America's oldest unsolved mystery. The leading theory remains that the colonists, facing starvation, did indeed move to CROATOAN Island to live with Manteo's people, eventually assimilating into the tribe. Other theories suggest they were wiped out by a hostile tribe, perhaps under the direction of Chief CROATOAN, or that they broke into smaller groups and scattered, attempting to survive in the wilderness. Despite tantalizing archaeological clues and persistent local legends, no definitive proof has ever been found. The story continues to capture our imagination, a haunting tale of hope, disappearance, and the enduring power of an unanswered question.